Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf Samach Avodah Zarah 66, and today's daf yomi is daf yomi for Shabbos Kodesh. So we're recording it on Friday, and now we're going to get into some of the most relevant sugyas for laws of kashrus. Very, very, very important sugyas, and that's the discussion for today's daf yomi. Today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and this Eis Tzara. Gemara tells us, Chamra Atika be'invei. If you have old wine and got mixed in with grapes, means to say grapes that were just pressed, so grape juice. So clearly, Rashi says, Tamo Nikor Ba'anavim. Really, the taste of the grapes is going to be recognizable in the grapes. So this is what's called min b'she'eno minu, two different tastes that get mixed together. So divrei hakol b'nosin tam. So everybody says that is going to be prohibited if the old wine, which is yayin netzach, is recognizable. So that gives off taste. So if it gives off taste, it's going to be clearly prohibited. Now we say as a general rule that taste is recognizable. If you can't taste it, it's recognizable 1/60th. If you can't determine it, we say that 1/60th is the amount of taste. Let's say you can't taste the food because maybe you're tasting prohibited food. So we say in general, it needs 60 times the amount. Now let's say you have chamer chadata be'invei. Let's say you have new wine in grapes. So Rashi says chamer chadata b'nosin tam. So Rashi says here we have new wine and it gives off taste. It's also prohibited if it gives off taste. But wherever we know that the rule is where it gives off taste, vein tam or nikar, and you don't recognize it, and you can't determine it because it's the same taste, then you need 60 times the amount. So let's say you have chamer chadata be'invei. Let's say you have the new wine in grapes. It tastes the same as the grape juice. Abaye amar b'mashu. Abaye says it's even any amount. But Rava says b'nosin tam. So Abaye is saying where it's the same taste, since the taste is not recognizable, we're going to say any amount prohibits it. Whereas Rava says, it's still b'nosin tam, and since we don't know how to determine the taste, we're going to say it's 1/60th. Abaye amar b'mashu. Abaye says it's with any amount because basar taima azlina. We go after the taste, and since idi v'idi chad taimo, since they're both the same taste, havile min b'mino. It's two things that are the same substance or the same taste that are mixed together. Or min b'mino b'mashu, and min b'mino is any amount because since even though they're not the exact same item, one is wine and one is grapes, but since they have the same taste, it's like they're the same item, and so therefore it's with a mashu. It's any amount. Rava says b'nosin tam. Rava says we follow the taste, but basar shma azlinom. Since even though they have the same taste, we go after the name, and since one is called wine, one is called wine, and one is called grapes, so therefore we're going to assume that they're two different things, and it's called havile min b'she'eno mino, and it's two different items together. It's a min b'she'eno mino, two different items together, and we have the rule min b'she'eno mino b'nosin tam. Therefore, it's with the amount that it gives off taste, and how much is that? That's 1/60th. So the Gemara challenges. This position of Abaye. What did Abaye said? That since they're the same taste, it's bim b'mino and it's b'mashu. That if the new wine got mixed in with the grape juice, it's the same taste because we follow the taste, and so therefore it's mashu with any amount. So the Gemara challenges that from our Mishnah. Tanan yayin nefach shenafal gabe anavim. It says that if the new wine, if the prohibited wine fell on top of grapes, then we're going to say under those circumstances it's prohibited if it gives off taste. So the Gemara's assumption is that it was the new wine that fell on grapes, and we say it's prohibited if it gives off taste. My love, b'nosin tam. So are we going to say that since it said in our Mishnah, it said in our Mishnah that the new wine fell onto grapes, and the Gemara assumes that it is the new wine on grapes, and it's prohibited with benosein tam, because and the Gemara is going to explain why it means that they're prohibited only with nosein tam. So we say, nevertheless, it's b'mashu. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what we're going to say. We're going to say it's not prohibited b'nosein tam. It's prohibited with mashu. It's prohibited if it gives off even any amount. So the Gemara says, no, but it can't be that it's prohibited with a mashu. Why? I mean, the Ketani Seifa, because the next clause in the Mishnah states, Zeh klal. The next clause in the Mishnah states, this is the general rule. Kol shebahanaso benosein tam, aser. Kol she'ein bahanaso benosein tam, mutter. So anything which it says in the next clause in the Mishnah, anything where you benefit from the flavor, kol shebahanaso, anything where you benefit from the flavor, that's if it gives off flavor, is prohibited. Kol she'ein bahanaso benosein tam, anything where you don't benefit from the flavor, it's mutter. So we see from here, from the fact that the seifa is referring to a place of where it gives off flavor, mikal, to benosein tamaskin. It means that we must be talking about giving off flavor. So therefore it's a question on, this is a question on Abaye, because it means that the latter clause is talking about that. So from the fact that that second part of the Mishnah is talking about anasa benosein tam, that we're specifically talking about a case of benosein tam and not a case of mashu. So the Gemara says, no, Abaye masnisim b'chamra atika be'invei. Abaye says that our Mishnah is talking about old wine and grapes. And so therefore, since it's talking about old wine and grapes, therefore it's not b'mashu, it's with benosein tam. So the Gemara now moves on to show how the discussion between Abaye and Rava also applies in the opposite way, where they have two different tastes but the same name. So what's the case that we're talking about? Chala de chamra, v'chala de shikra. Let's say you have vinegar of wine vinegar, and beer vinegar. So they're both called vinegar. So in that case, you're both called vinegar, or chamira de chiti, chamira de sa'ari, or we have basically leaven, or what we would call today sourdough of wheat and sourdough of barley that became mixed together. So Abaye says, remember Abaye's thing was that we go after the taste. Abaye says, since we go after the taste, benosein tam, basar, time aslina, we follow the taste. And since they have different tastes, are considered to be two different things. So since they're two different tastes, we're going to say it's batal b'shishim. Since there's two separate items, we follow the taste, and therefore it's prohibited 1/60. Rava says b'mashu, but Rava says that it's going to be prohibited in any small amount. Why? Because basar shmazling, they're both called vinegar. Since each one is called vinegar, each one is called leaven. They're called mimbamino b'mashu. And anytime you have mimbamino, it's prohibited with any minuscule amounts. The Gemara says, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, I'll prove to you that we go following the taste. And how can I prove to you to follow the taste? The Tanakh, because we learned in the Mishnah in Orla. Let's say you have Tavon Shnayim Ushlosha Shemos, Vein Min Echad. Let's say you have spices that have 2 or 3 different names, and they're all from the same type of species. Let's say they're all pepper, but they're all 3 names, but they're all called pepper. Min Shlosha, or Tavon Shnayim Ushlosha Shemos, Vein Min Echad, or Min Shlosha, or of 3 different species, asurin that are prohibited, umitzdarfin, and they combined. So therefore, if they all fall into a pot, although they are not enough to season on their own, they're going to combine with another to forbid it. What are we talking about here? This is what we're talking about here is, so basically we're quoting from the Mishnah from Orla. So all 3 of them are Orla, and they combine. they're going to prohibit it. Amar Chizkiah, Chizkiah says, what is this Mishnah referring to? Whole since they're all together fit to sweeten the pot. So anyway, we see from here, the Gemara is going to show so the Gemara, now that it's cited our Mishnah, Chizkiah's explanation, we say that since they're similar in taste, they're similar to prohibit it. So since we have the vinegar and the wine, which are totally different, we say benosin tam, basar time azlinon, v'hai time ochud, v'hai time ochud. Since they each have their own taste, benosin tam. That's the give off taste. Whereas Rava says b'mashu basar shmazlinon. So Rava says we go after the name. Now, Iyamar is B'shlama Basar Taimazlin, and if you're going to say you follow the name Kocha Taimu, then all things that provide the food with a single taste, that makes sense. Iyamar is Basar Shmazlinan, but if you're going to say you follow after the name, Hai Shmalchot, Hai Shmalchot, they have separate names in this case. They have separate names in this case. So it's like three different Orwa fell into the pot, and so therefore they're not enough to give off taste. So if you follow the name, it makes sense. But if you follow if you follow the name Hai Shmalchud, they're all separate things, and so therefore it's a question on Rava. So Rava Amrocha Hamani, Rava would say this is the position of Rabbi Meir. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir. How do you know that all the prohibitions of the Torah can combine with each other? So it states that's from the position of Lotocha Kol Toiver. Kol Shetiavto Charehu B'Bal Tochal. Meaning, say even though they're totally different flavors, they can combine with each other. So that's the position of Rabbi Meir. Let's say you have vinegar that falls into wine. Everybody's going to say that vinegar that's prohibited is prohibited only if it gives off flavor. Abaye, however, says b'mashu v'Rava Omar b'nosin tam. So everybody says that if vinegar falls into wine, everybody's saying that it's only prohibited if it is giving off flavor. But let's say wine falls into vinegar. Then Abai says b'mashu, and Rava says it's b'nosin tam. Why did Abai say it's with b'mashu, just a small amount? Because he says that wine, whose smell is vinegar and taste is wine, the wine smells like vinegar but tastes like wine. That's considered to be chala. That's going to be considered to be vinegar because they have the same smell. But therefore it's with a small amount. Whereas Rava says b'nosin tam. Rava says it has to give off taste because because the smell of wine and the smell of vinegar and taste is wine. That's wine. It's min, not in its min. It's all going to be giving off flavor. Mora says, Hi Bastia. So hi Bastia. So this comes to be, they used to smell wine through a Bastia. That's a hole that you made in the stopper of a wine barrel, and you smell the wine to determine its quality. So if an idolater sniffed the wine of a Jew through the Bastia, that's going to be okay. Why is that okay? Because he hasn't done anything to it. Since he doesn't touch or move the wine, it doesn't prohibit it. But if a Jew sniffs it through an idolatrous wine, Abai Amar Asa, Rav Amar Matar. Abai says prohibited, Rav says it's permitted. Abai Amar Asa Recha Milsi, because he says that smell is a problem. Recha is Milsi, meaning to say the smell of the food is like the food, and inhaling the smell is like eating it. Rav Amar Matar, Rav says it's permitted. Recha Rav Milsi, smell is not substance. Amar Rav Amar Mino Aderecha. How can I prove to you that smell is nothing? Let's say you have an oven that you fired up with the cumin of truma, afabosapas, and you bake the bread. Apas muteris, the bread is permitted if we ain't time from one because the taste is not cinnamon, cumin, it just smells like cumin. And so therefore we see from here Reichas Lav Milsi, Abaye says, Shani Asam, the Mikla Isur. Now there it's different because the prohibited item is no longer intact. Gemara says that this dispute between Abaye and Rava is actually a Tanaitic dispute. Amar of Mari, Aroda Paschama, somebody wants to remove hot bread from an oven. Unisana pichavesh al yain shel truma. You put it on a barrel of wine while it's hot of truma. Meir osu Rabbi Yehuda matir. Rabbi Yossi matir b'shalchitin. Whereas Rabbi Yossi allows it if it's wheat bread. He should need the osu b'shal sa'arim, but he prohibits it if it's barley bread. And they shall sa'arim show avos because the barley bread draws out the flavor. It draws out the aroma. So it must be that Rabbi Meir says prohibited. He says smell is substance. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says it's nothing. Umar says, so we see from here it's machokas tanaim. Or Rava vaday tanai. According to Rava, it's certainly machokas tanaim. Abaye miuema tanai. Abaye doesn't necessarily have to agree with that. Amar Abaye. Abaye could say everybody really holds reichad milzi. Are we talking about if it will be a hot bread in an open barrel? Everybody would say it's prohibited. If it's a cold bread in a closed barrel, then everybody says it's permitted. It's only talking about a hot bread and a closed barrel, but pasta nenes, the chavis petucha, or cold wine, cold bread in an open barrel. And this case of mine, meaning to say, where I say the bastillas, so it's like a hot barrel and an open barrel of wine, dummy. And so everybody would agree that under those circumstances, the smell is forbidden. So that's this important discussion, which we're just touching the tip of it. We're just getting a sniff of it, is whether or not smell is a substance. All right, we'll stop here. Yasha koach.